How do you go from a guitar riff in 9/8 to a punk rock tune with a backbeat like 4/4? You're tasked with coming up with a beat that is now in an 11/8 pattern, for the sake of argument. Could be anything, but and the original riff that it had come from was in 4/4. So now you want to go A, B between these two sections. How do you go about it? Because if you want to keep a consistency between your two riffs, particularly if the riff that the guy's written is based on the original and he's just added a little phrase or a variation inside it, you don't want to suddenly be lurching into an 8 division. You know, it changes the whole sort of feel of the tune. Music history is full of changes that do that. It's fine when it's right and you've got an arrangement that leads you into this big new section and it goes into it. But if all you're doing is just going from a verse to a chorus or between two sections in a normal tune, then lurching between a 4/4 and an 11/8 is often too noticeable, clunky, feels weird. So how do you wrestle with that? It's an 11, so if you keep your 4 pulse, then you're obviously going to have to go off the beat, so that's no good. People might write a pattern where the cymbals are more following the riff, so you're not sticking to your straight 4/4 pulse. That, in my experience, is how a lot of guitarists, it's a generalization, but it's quite often the case, a lot of guitarists, when they write drum parts on Easy Drummer or whatever, and they deliver their riff. That's another way that you might actually get the riff these days, perhaps not in rehearsal, but you've on your WhatsApp feed or something, there's a new file. Oh, you know, check out this new riff. You know, however it's introduced to you as a drummer, it's basically your job now to keep a consistency and a groove and a drive that runs through your tune. But how do you do it now you've been given this new 11/8? Well, I have a formula. I say formula. It's open-ended, you can do whatever you want with it, but a way that I approach this, and I thought I would talk about it in this video and show you a few examples of when I've done this. I've done it a lot of times over the years, and it is in essence simple, and it's a way to make these kind of transitions interesting, consistent, and easy to adapt and move between time signature changes in your tune. And the answer really, in essence, is simple. Keep playing 4/4. If you don't have an obvious pattern, sometimes, you know, the perfect beat comes to mind. You play an 11/8 beat, it's obvious, get straight into it. But if you got to think about it, then oftentimes, for me, I will keep playing essentially in 4/4. Which sounds nuts, I'll explain. But it follows from a conversation that I had with a friend of mine I was in a band with years and years ago, and we were talking about time signatures, and we came to an agreement, an idea that I've held to a lot through the years, which is if you are writing in 4/4, then it's often excellent to make that 4/4 as off the wall and wonky and weird as you like, because people will still be able to keep with you. If you're writing odd time signatures, then you want to make it sound as much like 4/4 as possible, because all of the weird flavor and movement is going to be coming from the riff that is in that odd time. So if you can keep the pulse feel as consistent as possible, then that's going to be the easiest way for your listeners to follow through this musical journey that you're taking them on. And I hold to that. I think it's a good policy. unless you're trying to write off the wall music. If you want good listenable music that's great to hear live for people that have maybe not heard your EP or whatever, and they're coming to see you live, they've been dragged by their boyfriends, whatever it is, then this idea of keeping odd time signatures as simple as possible, I think, is excellent. A way that I do that is basically, if we go back to this idea of this track that we're working on that starts in 4/4 and then it goes to an 11/8 section, just for the sake of talking it through. I might just keep the snare pulse going with my backbeat on 2s and 4s, but you've got to work out what the kind of lowest common denominator of the bars is going to be. So that's what changes when you do this, is the amount of bars that you play through will change rather than the amount of beats in the bar. And it usually works out that the number of bars in the cycle is the same as the denomination of your time signature. So if you're playing a 9/8 beat, then you will probably end up playing 9 bars of 4/4 in this new cycle that you're going to create, which is absolutely fine, because the listener is going to hear your riff that's in the odd time, and the fact that you have an odd number of 4/4 bars does not matter. And what you do is you basically match and map the kick drum and the snare to the rhythmic notes, the hits, however you want to describe it, the brass notes in old money of your new riff that's in the odd time signature. So you basically map it out, and in its simplest form, you can just keep the snare on the 2 and 4, and wherever your rhythm is hitting, you just put a bass drum there. So that what's going to happen is that your kick drum and the groove of the beat that you're playing is rolling on through and is mapping exactly to this new odd time signature section. But the snare and the pulse that you're playing with your cymbals on your hi-hat, your ride, or whatever it was, or whatever it is going to be consistent with the patterns, the 4/4 pattern that came before or after or whatever. It doesn't have to be 4/4. You could go from 5/4 to 11/8, but it is particularly useful when you're going from a kind of quarter note 4 division to an 8th note or even 16th note division, as a way of getting consistency. But I should say it's not set in stone, so you can just start with this as a framework, and I might either get the guitarist, if it is the guitarist, it might be a keyboard player or whatever, but whoever it is that's come up with a riff and that's got it and is feeling this new section, get them to play it, ideally play it to a click, or get it so that you've got it mentally in your head so that you can just hum it later on. And then in my DAW, I'll just have an audio file, and then I can just open up a drum patch and just MIDI map it. It generally helps me to sort of work it out to do it that way, although lots of times before I've done it on a bit of paper, whatever. But you can just map it out, and then you get this sort of framework that then you can listen to. But there is absolutely no reason why you can't then move the snares a little bit, swap some of the basses for snares, put odd rolls that fit with a particular groove. You know, you can do whatever you want with it, but it allows a framework to start the ball rolling with how to come up with a great new beat. I'm going to move to the computer. I've got an example that I've just knocked up, and I've got a couple of actually working examples of tunes that I've recorded in the past. Moving over here. All right, so what I've got here is a little ditty that I just knocked up. It is deliberately quite unmusical and rhythmically odd, to sort of demonstrate that you can kind of do this to anything. It goes from 4/4 to 7/8 instead of 11. I thought I'd make our lives a little bit easier. And I will just play you what the riff sounds like with no drums. It's a bit weird, but you'll get the idea. Bit weird, but let's see what happens. So we start off, and I'll play a drum pattern. There's a basic 4/4 drum beat, and then it goes into a 7/8 drum beat, as if you were just going to play a generic 7/8 beat over the top of it. And we'll listen to what that sounds like. This would be what you'd come up with in its simplest form. Ready for the change? So that change just comes, it's, it's horrible. So what do we do? Let's keep it in 4/4. So I'm going to mute out this, and I'm going to play this version that follows the principle I just mentioned, and then we'll look at the notes in a second. Let's see what it sounds like now. Can you hear the difference? It stayed much more consistent. Still weird as hell, this one, but even with that completely crazy pattern, using this, we can stay in place. So I wonder if I can show you these parts. So if we, hang on, let's go across to here. And as I go through the notes, if you look at them on the lead and the bass parts, then we can see that I have mapped across all of the notes exactly, either using a snare. If the snare was in the position of one of the hits, then you just roll it as a snare, just keep it as a snare. It's unusual to want to have the bass and the snare running at the same time. Personally, you get a stronger snare snap. As a general rule of thumb, outside of this context, try to not play a bass at the same time as a snare unless it needs it. So keep the snares either on the pulse that you want, might be the 2s and the 4s, whatever it was, and then every other hit or every other important hit that you want to accent in your new time signature, stick a kick drum on it. And you can just see, as I've gone through here, each of these maps to one of the notes in this 7/8 rhythm. So if I just play that in isolation, if I change my horrible. I'm sorry to punish you with that sound, but hopefully that's an introduction to the idea. Just to recap, snares, wherever they were consistent, either with what you were playing in your original 4/4 or what you want them to be, the snares can go anywhere. I think the main take home, the main thing is that you can keep the hi-hat or ride, the cymbal pattern at the same division, because that's the thing that makes the most obvious sort of lurching change, is when you go from a tat 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 tat, suddenly you're like building up the energy. Could be good, but it might not be what you want. So snares 2s and 4s or wherever you want them, divisions as they were in your previous 4/4 section, and then the bass drums wherever they fit exactly in the bar. And it could be on quarter notes, 8th notes, 16th notes, whatever you like. You can just play them in the position, so you just follow that groove of this new rhythm. Okay, so this is a good example because I literally stick straight to this principle here. It's from a track called In a Corner by All Hell Dog, and the guitar pattern was written by Steve, who used to be in the band, and it's 9/8 that I found a bit of recording of what it sounded like originally. So let's just listen to that. Introduction bit. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. All right. And it's bookended, if that's the right way of putting it, by 4/4s, the way we ended up arranging it and so on. It comes inside these 4/4 choruses. So I mapped a beat to it that follows the principle I just mentioned. The beat in isolation sounds like this. Hopefully this will play. All right. And then if we listen to the end recording, and I will just change my loops so that you hear a bit of the 4/4 on either side of it, how it comes in and out of it, and you can see how I think smoothly it works. So it ended up being quite a punk track, ended up being quite fast. It's a killer to play live, 190 BPM, really fast hi-hat. And I think this works really nicely. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ready? So we get to the end of our 9-bar cycle, back into 4/4. Seamless, right? I think the way I hear it and the way it works for me, it hasn't taken us out of context at all. And someone listening to it has just kept rolling with your 4/4 pattern, kind of ignorant perhaps to the fact that the guitars have gone into what would have otherwise been quite a crazy time signature change. Okay, third example is a 17/8 pattern written quite a while ago now by my old band 15 Litre. It's interesting in a number of ways. I think this is probably me pushing this formula to its final extension. But also it's interesting how we came up with this pattern because Andy was listening to me practicing and I was playing a routine that I often do, just a practice routine where I'm going single, double, triple, single, double, triple paradiddles. And he heard it and heard something slightly different into it. And he said, well, that's cool. What happens if you just take the end note off and then it rolls over better? And we came up with this pattern that ends up being in 17/8, which is born from the rhythm you get from a single, double, triple paradiddle. Weirdly, that's how it happened, and ends up being a really heavy, really filthy tune. And I'm going to play you just coming out of a fill where I'm playing double pedal, actually in 4/4, and then it leads into this extended, really fat 17/8 section, and then it goes back out into a 4/4 afterwards. Despite the fact the band are going absolutely nuts at this point, you'll hear I've pulled it all the way back to this half-tempo 4/4 that... Same principle. The kicks are all in place, and just there's compared to my previous two examples, I've just embellished the fills and done other bits that keep it in synchronicity with this pattern. But yeah, have a listen to this. This is heavy.
Everything that you have ever known. Progress, our ever-changing evolution process. Transmission now pulsing towards end of day. Walk to the next phase. Eyes wide. Price high. Our sights ready. Demolition is progress. It's the test of the process that feeds up the runs.
Back into the floor. Oh, still so heavy, that tune. Love it. Same deal. Just mapping out the kick drums, and it sounds filthy. All right. There's my examples. I hope that made some sense. I hope it wasn't too rambly and weird. It's a process that I've used many times, as I say, to come up with what would otherwise be very difficult to pin down drum beats. And yeah, works for me. There are other examples and other ways of doing it. It's just a thing that I do that helps me on my path. If you thought this was interesting, give it a like, maybe share it, subscribe, all these things. And until the next time, take it easy.